Hey, cool kids. I'm glad you're here this week. We have another awesome guest, Jack LaFountain. Now, Jack has spent time in the military. He's a veteran. He was in the service during the closing days of Vietnam. He's also moved on to becoming a minister as well as a nurse and has had a fabulous career, really being an example of servant leadership. Now, amongst all of Jack's accolades, one of the best ones is that his daughters referred to him as a cool father and a very cool grandfather. So you are going to enjoy this conversation with Jack. We're going to dive into what led him to start writing a bunch of fictional books, and not just a couple of fictional books, two complete different series. And we're going to dive into each one of those. We're going to dive into Jack's, motivation, maybe some of his inspiration. And we're going to talk about how his grandson really helped him out when he had some writer's block. And we're going to have a great conversation about how some of the people in an author's life can oftentimes show up in the work that we do. So you're going to enjoy this conversation. If you haven't done so already, please go over to YouTube, do a search for the Cool Grandpa Podcast, and please like and subscribe to that channel. It's another way that we can bring this message of being an intentional grandfather to as many people as possible, as well as just letting everybody know how cool it is to be a grandfather. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Jack. Hey, Jack, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have this conversation with you, and I would love to have you introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about your journey about becoming an author.
Oh, well, thanks, Greg. I really appreciate you having me on, and glad to talk about that. My road to becoming an author was a little bit bumpy, in that I didn't. I self-published my first book at 53. And we're talking too about grandkids. By that time, I already had several grandkids. But it kind of led me through. I mean, I started out at 17. I not really ran away, but kind of ran away to join the military, and spent some time in the Air Force during Vietnam. When that ended, I became an ordained minister, and I did that for several years until I took on a job as a hospice chaplain, and I decided I was going to add nursing to the ministry part of it, and I did, and I was a nurse for about 25 years, and I tried to do some writing late in that in that career, but really didn't start writing full-time until, I had back surgery, and that kind of ended my ER nurse career. Just couldn't take the hours anymore, and I didn't want to work in an office, so that was it. Although I guess I did end up in a way working in an office, but doing something completely different. And so since then, I've written 21 books since I retired in 2019. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's big. And I know one of the things that is going to be interesting is hearing a little bit about the impact that your relationship with Brian, who we'll introduce in a little bit, had with you. But, one of the things that I always tend to ask grandfathers is take us back a little bit to when you first found out you were going to become a grandfather, and help us understand what was going on and what your reactions were to hearing that news for the first time.
Yeah, actually, about the first time I heard it was kind of a double barrel attack. I found out my oldest son and my oldest daughter were both going to have children, and it came to pass. It happened about a month apart, not quite 30 days, that they both had daughters. And yeah, that kind of, that was kind of a big shock. Find out not only, okay, one, but you're going to have two, and they're going to be really close together, and you're going to have to figure this out in a hurry. It was exciting. I wasn't one of those necessarily that was in the delivery room, but there shortly thereafter, and they were and still are a great blessing. I was just starting my nursing career. I'd been out of school about 2 years, and really that's about the time it took me anyways, and most people, that you're really kind of just figuring out how to do the job and to do it without a nursing instructor right there that you can call on for help. You're out there on your own and trying to figure it out. And it was right about the time I was beginning to get a grip on it, which was good. If it had come sooner, that would have been a little tougher to do. But yeah, like I said, they came not quite 30 days apart. In fact, they both just had their 28th birthday. The second one, her birthday was 2 days ago. The other one was about 28 days ago. And like I said, they remain a great blessing. Since then, we've had each of those couples then had a son a couple of years later. And then I've got 3 grandkids that I acquired through marriage. And one, Brian, that we'll talk about in a bit, actually I acquired him as a grandson through adoption. My youngest sister died, and I adopted her daughter at about 20 months old, and then raised her, and then of course Brian has always called us grandpa, so we've always been that.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, as you were having the grandkids, did they live close by to you? Were they remote on the other side of the country? How was the distance and the relationships?
When they were born, we were pretty close. Probably everybody in the family within 70 miles, I guess, a 70-mile circle. So we were all pretty close for most of their growing up. Later, we had a more long-distance relationship, largely because I became a traveling nurse. And so
Okay.
I was always gone somewhere, and I think they all live in Oklahoma now. They're actually in a closer circle than that. They're within about 30 miles of each other. And so when I go back, it's easy to visit everybody pretty much at the same time. But yeah, I was all over basically everywhere south of the Ohio and west of the Mississippi for several years. And then after I finished doing travel nursing, I actually took a job with the government working for the Indian Health Service, and then followed that with Naval Medical Services before I retired. So always kind of far away for the most part.
Well, yeah. Well, I love and you're lucky that they're so close to each other now that you're able to go out and kind of visit one and visit the other one at the same time. We were fortunate enough, our sons actually lived in the same subdivision for a couple of years up in Virginia, and I'm down here in Georgia. And so when we go up for holidays, it was great because we didn't have to worry about going, I don't know, to Seattle one for Thanksgiving and, Fort Lauderdale for the other one. It was like, hey, we're right here. So grandma got all the grandkids at one time.
Oh that makes it nice. And I do that now, even though I live in Alabama and they're all in Oklahoma. I have at least, and I usually go more than once a year, but I have a book signing that I usually go to every September, an event. And so it's in Arkansas. So I usually go to Oklahoma first and spend time visiting with the kids and grandkids before heading on to go back to work and do the book signing.
Sure. One of the things I wanted to do, and we've touched on it a little bit, is I want to get into some of the other books that you had, but I know in talking with you and some of the conversation back and forth that, your relationship with Brian helped you when you got stuck with one of the books that you were working on. I would love for you to share that story with us.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad to. Early on in my writing, I think at the time I'd had 2 books that I'd done, and I was beginning to work on another one, and I had this really great idea, and I had this, and sometimes it works this way for me. It's sort of like seeing a movie, and I had this vision for this book, and I had the opening scene down, and it was about this creature, sort of winged creature, not quite human, but maybe partially so, who was winging his way through the rainforest towards the city. And the thing you could see of the city, there was this great golden dome over the city, or in the city, and he was headed there. I had no idea why he was going there, and what the story was all about. And I actually spent about a year while I was writing a third book trying to figure that out, and I never could figure it. I made several starts on the book and crumbled that up and threw it away because at the time I was writing in longhand and then typing it over onto the computer so I could edit as I typed. But then the scribbling got to be so bad that even I couldn't figure it out. So I gave that up, and the cut and paste was a whole lot easier. But I'd worked and I tried to get this. And one thing, Brian and I, we share a lot of the same traits and attributes and everything. He's more than any of the rest, probably he's wanted to be like Grandpa. So one day I think he was in about the third grade or so. And he wrote a story at school one day. To this day, I'm not sure that's what he was supposed to be doing. But that's what he did. And he brought it home, and it really didn't say anything to me about it. He just laid it on my desk for me to find. And it was about maybe 2 paragraphs, one page long. And I picked, I sat down there, I picked it up, I read it, and it was just, everything clicked. This is the story. The bare bones of the story, certainly, but this is a story. This is what happens to this character in the story. This is why he's going to this city, and this is what's going to happen to him after he gets there. It ended up, I actually started out, I was blogging the story a chapter a week. And it went about 62 weeks before I finally got done with it. In the end, and I sold it to a publisher. Basically, they did nothing with it and it took me 7 years to get it back. And I got it back, and the editor that I work with now went through it and said, well, it's way too long to be one book, so we're going to make it 3 for you to get done. But anyways, the book was published late last year, and it's been out, and it's done pretty well. In fact, I just published the sequel to it in January. So I've got two of the three written on that. I've got the last part of it to go, which people were asking about. I had a member of the American Legion, one of my friends there, said, you've got 3 armies in the field and this battle going on, and the book ended. I want the rest of the story.
Oh, that's just like one of the Tolkien books. I think he did that to us a couple of times where he had armies in the field or orcs or whatever coming to the heroes. And then all of a sudden it's just like, and they went down the river.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? And then you have to, we're lucky that we're not waiting for him to publish the next book. But yeah, I can definitely get when when authors do a little bit of a cliffhanger and some of the people are waiting for that. So it sounds like did you break up that book into 3 and then did you rewrite the other 2 parts of that, or
what I did, I broke several chapters off of that, and it kind of ended like you were saying. They crossed this river that was full of these monsters, and they got across the river to the other side, and that was the end. They were looking at what they had to, the land they had to cross, and that basically is where that one ended. The second one, we picked up their journey home, and I ended it. I have a friend who, when I was in Washington, one of the things I did as a nurse there was to train Navy corpsmen. And one of the corpsmen that I trained, he asked me while I was working on this first book idea, years before it got published, and he asked me, said, would you name a character after me? I said, sure, I'd be glad to name a character after you. And he immediately then said, but don't kill him off. I said, well, you've read 1 or 2 of my books. That was about all I had at the time. But I said, you've read my books. Just because you're dead doesn't mean you're no longer no longer active in the story.
Right. Now, what's the name of this book? Because I know you've got, I think, the Man of God series, and then you've got the Moon series going, right?
The name of this one, the first one is Trails of Trouble. Okay. And then the sequel is called Roads of Battle.
Okay.
So, and the last one's going to kind of follow the Bob Dylan song title, and it's going to be Paths of Victory.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, those are, like I said, those are out. And, I do have a couple of series, actually 3 now besides this, but I've got the Moon series, which basically revolves around a small town sheriff from Louisiana who finds that he has a rougarou. that shows up in his town, which is the Cajun werewolf.
Okay.
And he doesn't buy the idea. And of course, he has to be convinced that there's really one there. But he finally is convinced, and he has to come up with a rather unique solution, because he has a conversation with his deputy and said, he asked him, well, where do rougarous come from? He said, this thing didn't wander into our little town because we have all these attractions. It had to come from here. How did it come from here? And solving that problem and is kind of the twist at the end of the story that a lot of people said it took him by surprise how he solved the story. And the way he solves it gives into the next book. And there are 7 of those now. I'm about 9 chapters into book number 8 in that series. And now, like I said, but I do have the Man of God series. The Man of God series came about. I have a series of westerns that I'll talk about in a minute. But these are westerns that have, because I love werewolves, they have werewolves in them.
Okay.
My editor calls it, and I didn't realize. They'd been out for years when she finally told me this. This series is Men in Black before there were Men in Black. So she calls it the Men in Black hats.
Okay.
And what happened, the whole premise for the series is that during the war between the states, both sides made werewolves as terror weapons. Oh. And then when the collapse of the Confederacy happened and the troops were leaving Appomattox, or just before Appomattox, were scattered, these werewolves got away, and they went all these different places. And the men that were assigned to keep them while they were in the service were then recruited by the Union Army after the war to hunt them down.
Okay.
And make sure that basically nobody knew that werewolves were around, and certainly not that the Army had made them. And actually, I just finished a spinoff on that series. There were 3 in that series that all have to do, I call them the Red River Death series. But I just finished that, and up behind me on the shelf there, you see sort of cowboy-looking fellow. It's a new book called Pandemonium, which is a spinoff of that. Some of the same characters are going to be around, but in the trilogy of that, or the third book in that trilogy, there's a new character introduced, and he's going to be in the take off on a series of his own. But the Man of God series came about because I had that series, and a friend read it, and she's not a horror book kind of person, but she read the stories because I wrote them, basically.
Okay.
I was like, okay, you wrote them, I'll read them. And she after reading the first one, she said, would you please write me a Western that doesn't have any monsters in it? So she's a good friend. I said, yeah, I'll give that a try. I like Westerns too, which reason for those. I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I wrote a Western series. It's called Man of God, and it's spelled Mann, because the character in the story, his name is Christopher Mann.
Okay.
And he is an army deserter, outlaw, bank robber. He kills a fellow. He doesn't mean to, but he does. And he runs away from that and happens to run out of food, water, everything. And he winds up in this camp of a fellow who's on a fishing vacation, who happens to be the dean of a seminary. And he ends up going to seminary, becoming but he doesn't want to leave the seminary, but he's finally talked into doing it. The reason he doesn't want to leave is because he knows he's wanted. And he takes a church in a small town in Wyoming where nobody's going to, find him there. And he's there about a year when his old gang rides into town after a bank robbery.
Oh, boy.
And so he's outed to the church. And, of course, people are upset because, you never told us any of this. And he has to kind of, and that's why the very first one's called Redemption, and he has to redeem himself in their eyes, and that goes to that series. And we're at 4 there now, and I was honestly going to stop with 1.
Mm-hmm.
My editor, who I still have, says, no, write another one. You could write another one about him. So I did, and I got done with that. I said, okay, we're done. She said, no, it's got to keep going. And I said, but I've told his story. She said, yeah, you did. But then in doing so, you created this whole town full of people. And now you can tell their stories.
Okay.
He'll still be
Okay.
in, he's still in every book, but the third and fourth stories kind of center around more of the other people in town.
Gotcha. Maybe some of their skeletons or whatnot coming back in, or however you did it.
Yeah, he has to face a smallpox outbreak, and then after the town's kind of wiped out, and then he has to deal with a whole different problem because gold's discovered there, and he goes from a city of ashes to a boom town.
Yeah.
He just, basically overnight kind of thing.
Yeah, and those were really tricky. I mean, I think with you being in Washington and out west, for part of that is knowing how these towns would blow up and be bigger than San Francisco or whatever, and then trying to keep some organization
Well, yeah,
and law and order in those things was really tricky.
actually, I grew up my my later years, the teen years, and before I went in the service, I grew up in a town called Placerville, California, and back in the gold rush days, it was called Old Hangtown.
Okay.
And it's about 20 or so miles from Sutter's Mill,
Okay.
where gold was discovered. And
Yeah.
when I was growing up, I remember they would cut a new road through somewhere, and people would be out panning the dirt that they turned up.
Oh
And
yeah.
finding gold.
Okay, so this is going to be you're going to like this tie-in. So I have an aunt and an uncle that live in a town called Fiddletown that is there, and it's a legit, like, I think they might have had a blinking light, but it was a post office general store setup.
Yeah.
And there's hydro mining on their ranch, and including some of the stone structures. And they've got gold and things out there. So when we were kids, we'd go out there, they'd give us a pan and have at it. We never found anything. But there's gold there, but it's one of those cases now where it's too expensive to bring it out.
Yes.
But yeah, that was, oh my gosh, that part of California is full of adventure. And I think still with little kids and dreamers thinking of turning over a rock and finding a big old gold nugget.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I wrote a short story. It's in one of my books, and the name of it is The Wolf Bat of Missouri Flat. It's kind of a paranormal kind of thing, but it takes place in a real place, not near where I grew up. That was called Missouri Flat. I'm not sure exactly why. I don't know the real history of it. We thought it was because it's one of the only flat places for miles around. It was flat, and it had a long straightaway, which,
Okay.
teenagers were out there, took the cars out there.
Oh yeah, no, I've seen American Graffiti.
Yeah, that was the Missouri Flat area, and yeah, we actually I used some of the people I grew up with, their names, and use them as characters in the story. And basically, they fellows in the story, they invent this creature called the wolf bat. It says part wolf, part bat, and they panic the town, and the whole reason behind it is they're trying to steal all the gold.
Okay.
So they have
Interesting.
fun with they organize a big hunt, and everybody goes out hunting wolf bat.
Interesting. So, what were some of your influences growing up? Because a little bit of what I'm hearing is some of these characters in some of the books very much sound like some of the B movie 50s horror type things where you've got the, I don't know, mole people, or you got the, different kind of things like that. But
yeah, I love the B-Sci-Fi movies. One I still watch every time I see it come around is called Them. It's about giant ants that, the radioactive waste, or where the first atomic bombs in White Sands were set off, and it, mutated these ants into giants. Yeah, I loved all of those. I can remember on Saturday afternoon going to the movies and watching all the Edgar Allan Poe stories that were made into movies. Vincent Price was in a lot of them.
Yep.
Yeah, I would go and watch those on the Saturdays. Stay and watch them 2 or 3 times if I could get away with it.
Yeah, it was House of Wax and,
Right.
Some of those types of things. A buddy of mine here in town is bought a whole DVD collection, and every once in a while after work we'd get together, eat pizzas, and watched some of those things. I think the head that wouldn't die, and
Yeah.
I don't know, you get all these caterpillars that are the size of a house, and I think the Blob is probably one of the biggest ones
Oh
that
yeah, yeah.
made it, and that was, I think, one of Steve McQueen's very first roles
Yeah, I
was
think so.
was in that.
I have that one on the DVD still. Keep a player where I could watch it. But yeah, yeah, I love those movies. I watched them constantly growing up. I watch them now. Really, I was talking with a fellow this morning. And he was talking about TV shows, and I don't know. I don't really watch TV much at all. I've got to be somewhere else, and it seems like if I do put on a movie, whether it's streaming or whatever, I don't put on a lot of the new ones. I put on those old ones again, and I still watch those.
Sure, sure. I would like to ask you a little bit about your writing process and how you got into it, and maybe what some of the first challenges that you had, because I know we've got listeners that are starting to write, whether it's memoirs or creative writing, what have you. But what were some of maybe your early challenges with sitting down and actually writing and creating?
Well, probably the earliest hurdle that I had to overcome, I found that I'm what writers call a pantser. There are pantsers and there are plotters. The plotters plot out the whole story. They know from before they really even begin to start writing it what's going to happen all through the story. And then pantsers write by the seat of their pants. They just dive in and start going. And each one has its merits and its challenges. One of the huge challenges for pantsers like me is that, yes, we jump in and the story's on fire and it's going well, and we know where that we kind of know what the end is. Pretty sure we know what the end is. We don't always, but pretty sure we know what the end is. But when you get to the middle, it's all the subplots and the other things that are happening to get you to the end. We kind of bog down there. And the way that I overcome it, besides being a pantser, I'm very character driven. I kind of approach it like I let the characters tell me what's going to happen, and they're pretty good about it. I have all these invisible friends that and they're pretty good about telling the stories. But occasionally I'll get to a place and I'm trying to work through it, and it's like they're not talking to me. I don't know why, but they're not talking to me. And so what I've found that I can do is that I'll just start writing anyways. I'll write what I want. And usually, and it's happened more than once, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I know that chapter is not right.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's supposed to happen. They'll come along and tell me what really is supposed to happen. And so I get up the next morning and I go back and cut all that stuff I wrote out of there and put in the good stuff.
Well, and I was going to say too, is it seems like they never show up at like 8:30 in
Yeah,
the morning
yeah,
after you had a cup of coffee and woke up. It's like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's like, oh, we're going to keep you up for the next hour and a half.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. And I did that a lot when I was working still and trying to write, especially. But then I kind of appreciated it because it was a good time to be up to write because nobody, the kids weren't awake. It was a quiet time to write. But yeah, but I've found something that when I was in high school, the English teacher, about the only English teacher I had while I was there. She had us come into class and write for 10 minutes, the first 10 minutes of class. Didn't matter what you wrote. Didn't matter if it made sense. Just write. Just pick up the pen and start writing. And you had to write for 10 minutes before the class started. And that, I think, has helped me later, especially since, like I said, I write by the seat of my pants. But it got me in the habit of when I sit down, if I'm having some trouble coming up with an idea, just start writing something. And of course, a lot of it gets thrown away. Some of it hangs around, like Trails of Trouble, which I had that opening idea, and that's all I had. But I had that, and I had it written down, and I've done that with some stories. I'll write something down, and I read it. I said, well, this is probably too good to throw away, but I don't know what else goes with it, so I'll just file it and keep it somewhere.
Well, very cool. Yeah, I think some of that is you've just got to let the subconscious and let life kind of work with it a little bit before you go, okay, this is what this story needs to be.
Yeah, I think so. And I work with the publishing company too, and my job is the initial edits for a lot of the authors that write. And I tell them that they're probably tired of hearing me say it, that writers write. And that if you want to do it, you've got to write. Not necessarily do you have to write every day, but your mind's got to be thinking about writing, and you do have to take those times when you don't have any idea and just start writing. That cursor blinking on the blank page just taunts you.
Yeah, it does for sure. And how do you go about keeping track of, with some of your work involving supernatural or creatures and things, how do you go about making sure that you're following your own universe's rules? Meaning that, for example, here in Atlanta, we had somebody that did some fantasy. And one of the things that they did was kind of create a spreadsheet as they were going to go, okay, well, this person has this kind of magical abilities, and these are the constraints, and these are the things they can and can't do. Do you do anything like that, or do you just kind of edit that out as it goes?
It's sort of a combination of both. I do that, especially the Man of God series. My editor said, draw me a map of this town. Because I want to know where everything's at. You have an idea of where it's at. But then again, she's very good at this, and was doing some of it this morning on another author I noticed. If I in one of the early chapters have him come out of the sheriff's office and turn left to get to the hardware store, and later on in the book I have him come out and go right to go to the hardware store, she catches it. She's very good about that. It's like, and of course, now she uses the map of the town that, point out, said, look, this is, but she will, she'll do that. You said they went this way in this chapter, and you said that they went this way in a later chapter. They have to go one way or the other. They can't go both.
Well, that's good that you have somebody that does that. But then I also probably guess that at moments you kind of wish, like, dang it, I wish I hadn't drawn that map for her, because now I got to go back and, do some changes and edits and whatnot.
Yeah. Sometimes, it gets that way. Another thing that is, she keeps track of, because I do a lot of supernatural and horror stuff, is what time of day I said it was.
Okay.
And could they do all that in the time that I gave them?
Well, it's supernatural, so time can speed up and slow down,
So, I was working on a story this morning, and I had that, basically this girl fell through a hole in time, and so she spent a lot of time where she ended up at before she got back, and she got back, it was only 5 minutes later.
Well, that can be trippy. I mean, different shows and different books have done those kinds of things, right? And that's I don't know, is that a takeoff on kind of the Rip Van Winkle? I mean, in terms of like, it's a week for this person, but it's 5 minutes for everybody else, or vice versa.
Yeah, sometimes, and in fact, I was watching the old original Planet of the Apes yesterday, and again, that same sort of thing. And that's scientific truth there. The curvature of time and all that changed things. But a lot of, this is the first time I've ever really done this in a story, and I don't remember exactly which one, but I remember reading one of Stephen King's books. And he had, I think it was in the Dark Tower series, one of those books.
Oh, I like that one. Yeah.
He had a thing, and he called it a thinning. That was kind of, and that's what it was. It was a portal, a time portal.
Man, I like that series. Yeah, and the thinning sounds familiar, where it's a time distortion kind of areas, right? Mm-hmm. I got to tell you, I don't know about what you thought about the ending for that, but I was frustrated. I mean, I got it as far as, the author can do what the author wants to do, but for folks that don't know, so the very first book opens up with a scene where the hero is chasing the villain of the series, and they open a door and then they're running across the desert. At the very end of the book, the hero is pursuing the villain, and they burst through a door, and it's essentially the first paragraph of the first book.
Yeah.
That they've done this whole big loop. Like I said, it's a little one of those, like, as a reader, I don't know if that's very satisfying, but as an author, it's a little bit of a different mindset because to your point,
Yeah.
sometimes these characters tell you what the story is, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I wasn't thrilled with the ending to that. It was all right. I tell you, the book where the ending really got me, because it's probably my favorite book of all time, other than the ending. And it's about 900 pages long, and that's Don Quixote.
Oh,
And for about 898 pages, I'm thrilled with the book. And then it gets to the end. I wish I'd read other books. No, no, you know,
right.
it
Yeah,
can't be
because
this way.
you go through this whole thing with the families and the going after the windmills and you're doing all these different things. Yeah, and then it's like I don't know, I kind of feel a little bit like Three Musketeers did that a little bit too, where you're having these duels and you're having all this in most of the people for the movies, it's the very first book or so that typically gets made and gets
Hmm.
talked about, but there's other books and some of those stories just kind of like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah,
Right. It's like I ran out of steam and I just need to get this to the publisher and get paid. So Dumas, right?
yeah.
Alexander Dumas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've read some that are kind of that way, and like I said, it to me it takes away some if there, and it doesn't so much for me as if, and sort of like I did, I guess, but if there's going to be a sequel, kind of wrap up that first part. So you could, I mean, if you're new to the series, you can jump in on the second one, and you're not completely lost.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think some of the books, but I almost wonder too if some of those authors have to think that what they're starting to create is going to be a series. Because if you think it's just going to be a standalone, then you kind of just I would think create and write as you want. But then if you have something like a Lee Child Reacher type book or Longmire or something else that have a dozen or 20 books, yeah, you kind of have to think about those a little bit differently, I think.
Yeah, I think so. When I started out doing the Moon books, I planned that to be a series from the start. Again, going back to some of the old things that I watched, the Kolchak series.
Okay.
That's kind of what this thing. I mean, I didn't want to copy it, but I wanted to do something like that where the hero is always running into all these different things, whether it's vampires or werewolves or whatever. He just seems to be out doing his job as a reporter, and he's thrown into this situation. And I wanted to do that with Sheriff Landry in this book, that he gets involved in this situation, and sort of one thing leads to another, and throughout the series is like, when am I going to get a break? This
Yeah.
stuff keeps happening to me, and when am I going to get a break? The
That
others, I don't. Well, like I said, the Man of God, I thought about I wanted to do 2 books, but that was it on that one. I've done more, and the same with the Red River Death series. I planned 1 book. That was it. And then I got an idea for a second one later that really it springs from the first one, but it's a story sort of all on its own. Um, and that one, and I definitely thought I was done with that one, and actually had a reader that wrote me and said, yeah, I like how you left the door open for a 3rd book in this. And I thought, did I? And then I got to thinking about it, and they pointed out the scene, and I said, man, I did.
well, that's got to be a case of the town and the characters not finished with you yet.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. Yeah, they're not done with me.
Oh, that's awesome. And Jack, as we start to wrap this up, is there anything about being a grandfather uh, that I haven't asked you that you'd like to talk about a little bit more, or even being an author?
Yeah, well, I really love being a grandpa. I was talking to my daughter about our speaking today, and this, the show's called Cool Grandpa. I hope I live up. I said, oh yeah, you'll be okay. You're a cool dad. And you and Brian get along so great that you're going to be okay on there.
Oh,
But
that's awesome.
yeah, I mean, and I still, he we still do kind of get along, and he I asked him if he'd read the book, basically, that he helped write, and he said, I read a couple of chapters and I quit. I was like, why? He said, this character sounds too much like me. I said, really? And he said, yeah, it's sort of some of the things he was going through at the time. And I thought, I didn't tell him, but I drew the inspiration for the character from me.
Okay.
So yeah, she's still being like grandpa, I guess, but appreciate that.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, and I think that's tricky too, is that, as writers, we tend to pull personalities and from people around us. And, sometimes maybe we do borrow a little bit too much from the folks around us that make it into the books.
Yeah, sometimes my editor was telling me the other day that you've used me in a book, haven't you? And I said, well, not. She said, yes, you have. Said, because she said, characters have said things in the story that I've said to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, well, not quite word for word, but I told you that the same thing. And
Sure.
so I know I got it from you.
That's funny. Well, hopefully they don't ask for too much in royalties.
Yeah, Brian's asked if he got royalties. I told him, well, we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah,
Maybe I should, because I actually put his story that I got the inspiration from in the book.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the book.
Well, maybe you can buy him off with some Dairy Queen or something.
Yeah, I think so, probably.
That's awesome. So, Jack, where can people find you? Where can they look up the book series that you have?
Actually, you can find them on Amazon, but if you go to jacklafountaineauthor.com, all the books are on there, and most of my books, but not all of them, are on Audible. And so on the website, you can listen to a little bit of the books that are on Audible already, or you can go to houseofhonor.com, which is the publisher that does my books, and there's some other good authors on there that are worth reading.
Sure. Yeah, we'll check that out. And then I know too that you're, I think, on Facebook and you're on some of the social medias.
Right. Yeah.
Sites and things.
Yeah, I'm on. It's facebook.com/author Jack LaFountain is my author page, and you can find me on there. You can find me on Amazon Author Central, and
Okay.
there's a link for that on my website to get you there.
Cool. And we'll be sure to put those links into the show notes as well for folks that are out mowing the lawn or doing whatnot,
yeah,
washing dishes, and don't have pen and paper close at hand. So they can go to the show notes and find all these links there.
Oh, great. Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Well, Jack, this has been an absolute blast talking with you and learning a little bit about your journey in becoming an author and your experience with becoming a grandfather. So thank you very much for your time this evening.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you.